She broke into his office with a fake identity. He gave her a deal instead of calling security. What started as a reckless plan for a story turned into something much darker and far more dangerous. Power, secrets, betrayal, and a connection neither of them saw coming. But what happens when the truth you're chasing becomes the lie you can't escape? Subscribe now to our YouTube channel for the full story. Because some truths are worth breaking the rules for. The lobby of Blackwood Media Tower buzzed with polished footsteps and clipped conversations, the air thick with urgency and ambition. Maya Evans tightened her grip on the bouquet of white tulips in her arms, her heart thumping like it was trying to claw its way out of her chest. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Technically, she was just a journalism graduate with no official press badge, no appointment, and certainly no invitation to step foot inside the nerve center of one of the most powerful media conglomerates in New York. But she'd gotten creative. The delivery uniform hung awkwardly on her small frame, and the ID tag she'd photoshopped last night was beginning to peel at the corners. Still, she walked with purpose, channeling the confidence of every reporter she'd ever admired. The receptionist barely glanced up as Maya offered a quick delivery for Mr. Blackwood, urgent. Without waiting for a response, she slipped past the security checkpoint, her sneakers squeaking softly against the marble as she headed for the executive elevator. She knew Damian Blackwood's office was on the 42nd floor, top-level, corner suite, all glass and mystery. No press had ever gotten a real interview with him. He was a ghost in a perfectly tailored suit, unreachable, until now. The elevator dinged open into a silent hallway bathed in natural light. Maya's heart jumped. She tiptoed past an assistant's empty desk and rounded the corner, spotting the door that read D. Blackwood in understated silver lettering. She inhaled sharply, "This is it." Raising the bouquet like a flimsy shield, she knocked once, then pushed the door open. Damian Blackwood stood near the window, back turned, speaking into a Bluetooth earpiece. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly commanding, he exuded an energy that made the room feel colder just by him standing in it. He turned slowly at the sound of the door. Maya froze. She hadn't planned this far. His eyes, an unsettling shade of storm gray, locked onto her, flicking briefly to the flowers, then back to her face. "You're not with security," he said flatly. "No," she admitted, her voice thinner than she wanted, "but I do have flowers." His expression didn't change. "Those aren't for me." "Not unless you have a secret admirer," she offered, with a hopeful smile. Silence. She swallowed hard, stepped inside, and let the door close behind her. "Look, I know this is unorthodox, but I'm not here to hurt you, steal from you, or cause a scene. I just want 5 minutes, that's it." He arched a brow, folding his arms. 5 minutes for what? Maya lowered the bouquet. "To ask you a question no one else has dared to ask." Another pause. She could feel her palms sweating. "I'm Maya Evans," she added quickly. "Journalism graduate, no job, no fancy press badge, but I've done my homework. And I know that despite what people say, you didn't inherit Blackwood Media. You built it from the ashes." Damian said nothing. The tension in the room thickened. "I want to know who you really are, Mr. Blackwood. Not the headlines, not the mystery, the man behind all this." He studied her like one might a puzzle missing pieces. Finally, he walked toward her slowly, deliberately, stopping a few feet away. "You realize this could have ended with you being escorted out by security, banned from ever setting foot in this building again." "Yeah," Maya said, forcing a smile, "but it didn't." Another long pause, then something flickered behind his eyes. Amusement, curiosity. "Leave the flowers," he said, "and wait outside the office. You'll get your 5 minutes, but not now, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Maya blinked. "Wait, are you serious?" "I don't joke with trespassers," Damian said, turning back to his window. "Now go, before I change my mind." Maya backed out of the office, her heart racing with disbelief. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Holy hell, it worked. The next morning, Maya returned to the Blackwood Media Tower without the flowers, without the disguise, and without any clue what she'd actually say if Damien Blackwood really gave her 5 minutes. The receptionist didn't even glance up this time. Apparently, her name was already on the guest list. 42 floors later, she found herself once again outside the office with the understated silver lettering. The door opened before she could knock. "Come in," Damien's voice called, cool and clipped. He sat behind a sleek black desk, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal forearms taut with tension. A tablet rested in front of him, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. "You're punctual, that's promising," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." Maya obeyed, spine straight, fingers clenched in her lap. "So," he began, "you broke into my office, lied about your identity, and violated a half-dozen security protocols. Why shouldn't I report you and ensure you never work in media again?" "Because I'm not here to destroy you," she said, calmly but firmly. "I'm here to understand you." That caught him off guard. His brows dipped slightly, not in anger but in genuine confusion. She leaned forward just a bit. "You've built a media empire that controls narratives all over the country. People either idolize you or fear you. And yet, no one really knows who you are. No interviews. No appearances that aren't scripted. You hide in plain sight." Damien tilted his head. "And you think you're entitled to that story?" "No," she said. "I think that story matters, and no one else is going to tell it the right way." He stared at her in silence, the ticking of his minimalist wall clock the only sound in the room. Finally, he leaned back, folding his hands under his chin. "You're bold, Ms. Evans, borderline reckless." "I get that a lot," she muttered. "But you're not wrong," he added. Her eyes widened. "I'm not going to give you an interview," Damien said. "You're not ready, you don't know enough. You don't even know what questions to ask yet." "Then let me learn," Maya said before she could stop herself. "Let me be around. Let me see it for myself." He raised an eyebrow. "Shadow me." "Something like that." He stood up, walked around the desk and leaned against its edge, arms crossed. "Here's my offer," he said. "You work for me. 1 month, assistant-level clearance. No interviews, no recordings, no publishing. You do as you're told, you watch, you listen. And in return, when the month is over, I'll give you something, maybe even a story." Maya blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "I never joke about business." "Why me?" she asked, genuinely baffled. Damien's expression didn't soften, but his voice lowered just enough to feel personal. "Because you're the first person who walked in here with nothing, and still dared to ask who I am." She hesitated for a beat. "And if I say yes?" He extended a hand. "Then welcome to the Lion's Den, Ms. Evans." She shook it. And that was how Maya Evans, journalism graduate, unemployed, unverified, and unbelievably persistent, became the temporary assistant to Damien Blackwood, the most elusive media mogul in New York. She had no idea what she'd just signed up for. But something told her he didn't either. The first week went by in a blur of color-coded calendars, back-to-back meetings, and more non-disclosure agreements than Maya thought legally necessary for one building. Damien was many things, brilliant, ruthless, infuriatingly precise, but above all, he was unreadable. Maya followed him like a shadow, absorbing everything, saying little. He never raised his voice, never lost control, and yet the power in a single look could make an entire boardroom sit straighter. But something felt off. It wasn't Damien, or at least not just Damien. It was the way people acted around him. The way certain conversations stopped when she entered a room. The way the senior staff always looked a little too composed, like they were all reading from a script they hadn't written. And then there was Zoe. Maya first met her during a crisis response meeting on the fifth day. Something about a tabloid leaking fake stories about a rival startup being acquired. Zoe swept into the room like she owned the air itself, all sharp heels and sharper smiles. PR director, she introduced herself after the meeting, offering Maya a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for. Zoe lively, you must be the new intern, assistant, spy. Maya blinked, excuse me. Zoe laughed, her tone light but her gaze razor-sharp. Relax, just teasing. Damien doesn't usually let people orbit that close, especially not ones without a six-figure salary and a security clearance. Guess I'm the exception. You're definitely something, Zoe said, sipping her own coffee. Over the next few days, Zoe took an odd liking to Maya. She'd drop by unannounced, share office gossip, offer friendly warnings wrapped in casual banter. And Maya wasn't sure whether she liked Zoe or was mildly terrified of her. Just a tip, Zoe said one afternoon, leaning against Maya's desk. If you ever think Damien trusts someone completely, you're wrong. He only trusts systems, algorithms, data, never people. Maya tilted her head. Are you saying that as advice or as a warning? Zoe's lips curled into a knowing smile. Both. There was something in Zoe's demeanor, too polished, too rehearsed. Every word she spoke felt calculated, as if she were auditioning for a role that no one else knew existed. Maya started noticing patterns, documents that went missing and reappeared edited, Damien reacting to news leaks faster than any public channel released them. A project proposal Maya personally filed that somehow showed up in a competitor's hands 2 days later, with the same phrasing. Someone on the inside was pulling strings, leaking things, watching. And the more Maya observed, the more she became certain. Someone at Blackwood Media wasn't just doing damage control. They were manipulating the narrative from within. And Zoe Lively might be smiling too much to be innocent. By the second week, Maya realized that working for Damien Blackwood was not a job. It was a survival test wrapped in a psychological experiment. He didn't yell, he didn't micromanage, he didn't even raise his voice. But every task he assigned came with an unspoken subtext. Do it perfectly. Do it fast. Do it before I think to ask. He never repeated himself. He never missed a detail. And he definitely noticed when someone else did. Ms. Evans, he said one morning without looking up from his laptop, this presentation you prepared, slide 7 has a font that's 0.5 points smaller than the rest. Maya blinked. I must have. I didn't say it was your fault, he said evenly. I said it's wrong. No emotion, just fact. She fixed the font. The next day, he sent her back 3 different reports for being chronologically disordered. It turned out the timestamps were in 12-hour format instead of 24. Another day, he handed her his phone, asked her to draft a message to a partner company, and when she used an M- instead of an N-, he calmly deleted the entire thing and retyped it word for word. He wasn't cruel, just impossibly exact, like he'd built his life around precision and any deviation, however minor, was personal. At first Maya was furious, then she was exhausted, but eventually she became curious. It wasn't just perfectionism, it was control, complete control. His desk was arranged like a minimalist shrine, pens aligned by length, documents stacked to the millimeter. Even his tea, yes, he drank tea, not coffee, was steeped precisely 4 minutes and 30 seconds, never a second more. One afternoon, she saw him pause before opening a door, touch the handle 3 times in the exact same rhythm before proceeding. She said nothing. She started adjusting to him instead. She anticipated his preferences, changed default fonts, double-checked time zones. When he handed her something, she no longer asked what to do, she told him what she'd already done. Damien didn't compliment, But on Friday evening, as he was packing up, he paused by her desk. "You haven't made the same mistake twice," he said. Maya looked up startled. "Thank you." It wasn't a compliment, he added, but there was a flicker, just a flicker of something in his voice. Curiosity. She smiled, wasn't expecting one. He gave her a long, unreadable look. "Still, most people don't last this long." She leaned back. "Maybe I'm not most people." And for the first time since she'd met him, Damian Blackwood almost smiled. The day had gone off the rails by 10:17 a.m. A whistleblower had accused one of Blackwood Media's subsidiaries of fabricating data in a major environmental investigation. Headlines exploded across every outlet by noon. Even the company's own platforms were struggling to keep up with the backlash. By 3 p.m., the press conference was scheduled. Damian, of course, refused a prepared statement. He insisted on speaking directly. No teleprompter, no spin. He stood behind the podium with cameras flashing, questions barking like hounds, and delivered a measured, surgical dismantling of the allegations. Maya watched from the side of the stage, clutching her tablet with shaking hands. He was good, brilliant, even, but something about the way he gripped the edge of the podium made her uneasy. He was holding on too tightly. After the conference, Damian disappeared without a word. It wasn't like him. She found him 20 minutes later in an unlit conference room on the 41st floor, alone, sitting with his back to the door. His blazer was draped carelessly over a chair. His tie hung loose around his neck, and one hand was pressed against his forehead, as if he were holding his skull together. Maya paused in the doorway. "Damian." He didn't move. She stepped inside, letting the door shut quietly behind her. I know I should probably leave you alone, but—" She hesitated, her voice softening. "You don't look okay." Still nothing. His breathing was sharp, too fast. One leg was bouncing, fingers twitching slightly. She'd seen panic before. This wasn't ego or stress. This was something deeper. Carefully she approached, kneeling beside his chair without touching him. "You're having an episode," she said gently. "Do you know that?" His jaw was clenched tight. "I don't panic." "You're right, of course not," she said, voice calm. "You just breathe like you're drowning." Silence. Then a dry, bitter exhale that might have been a laugh, or the beginning of a sob he refused to let out. Maya reached out slowly, showing her hands first, like calming a wounded animal. She laid one palm lightly over his, grounding him. "Just breathe with me," she whispered. "In through your nose, 4 counts like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, good. Out through your mouth, 4 counts, again." To her surprise, he followed, not perfectly but enough. Gradually, the tension in his shoulders lessened, his legs stilled. The room was dark, quiet now except for their synchronized breathing. After a long moment he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I hate that you saw this." "I don't," she replied simply. He finally looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes weren't sharp or cold this time. They were raw, tired, human. "No one sees this part of me," he said, "ever." Maya held his gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone did." The air between them shifted, heavy with something unsaid. Not attraction, not yet, but something more dangerous. Recognition. He looked away first. Maya stood, giving him space, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't have to be invincible all the time, Damian." He didn't answer. But when she turned to leave, she heard him whisper behind her. "Thank you." It started with something small. A calendar event that she didn't create appeared on her work account, just a single, innocuous-looking reminder titled, "Confirm file transfer 3:00 p.m., but there was no transfer scheduled. No meeting, no context." Maya blinked at it, confused. Maybe she'd clicked something by mistake. Then it happened again. An internal document she was working on suddenly closed itself and reopened with the formatting slightly altered, fonts swapped, one paragraph duplicated twice. Then her email logged her out, twice in one morning. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as a chill crept up her spine. These weren't technical glitches. They were too specific, too intentional. She ran a diagnostic just to be safe. Her system showed an unrecognized login from Internal 42, a floor in the building she wasn't cleared to access. Someone inside was poking around. The next day, her personal phone buzzed at 11:42 a.m. Unknown number. Still playing reporter Maya. She froze. No name, no emoji, just that single sentence and the sudden awareness that someone had not only breached her company system, but also knew who she really was. She locked her screen, heart hammering. Around her, the office buzzed as normal, too normal. She made a decision then. From now on, she'd document everything. A burner notebook hidden in her desk drawer. Times, dates, IP addresses, offhand comments. Every time Zoe popped into her office unannounced. Every time she caught someone glancing her way during meetings. Every detail. Especially Zoe. Because as much as Maya wanted to trust her, or at least like her, Zoe was too perfect, too calm. And she had access to everything: press releases, internal memos, crisis planning files. PR wasn't just about spinning stories. It was about controlling them. And Zoe, she was the kind of woman who didn't just manage a narrative, she designed it. One afternoon, Maya passed by Zoe's office when the door was slightly ajar. She paused, just a second, when she heard her name. "She's not a threat yet," Zoe's voice said, low and smooth. "But we're watching her." Another voice responded, muffled male. She couldn't hear the words, only the reply. "I know, I have eyes on her already." Maya didn't wait to hear more. She walked away, forcing herself not to run, not to breathe too fast. If they knew she'd heard. She slipped into the restroom, locked the stall, and pulled out her phone. She opened the Notes app, typed a single word. Zoe. Then she deleted it. Better to keep things offline now. Whatever game was being played inside Blackwood Media, it was bigger than her. And she'd just become a piece on the board. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Damien started looping her into things: a confidential budget meeting, a strategic pitch session, a late-night call with a European investor that ended at 2 a.m., where he tossed her a pen mid-call and mouthed, "Write that down." She did. He never praised her outright, but he stopped double-checking her work. He started asking for her opinion. And once, when a department head interrupted her mid-sentence, Damien cut him off with a calm but pointed, "She wasn't finished." That was the moment Maya knew something had shifted. It wasn't just professional. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was personal. There was a quiet undercurrent of trust, and it terrified her. Because she hadn't told him the truth. Every morning she woke up with a knot in her chest. She arrived at Blackwood Media with an agenda, a mission. She wanted to uncover the shadows behind the empire. She wanted the truth, his truth. And now here he was, letting her into the machinery. She watched him differently now, not as a mystery to crack, but as a man she was beginning to understand. A man who carried too much and showed too little, who knew the weight of power and the loneliness that came with it. One evening, they stood together on the rooftop terrace after a board meeting ran late. The city shimmered below, cold and endless. "You did well today," Damien said, his voice quiet. "Are you saying thank you?" she teased, arms crossed to ward off the wind. "I'm acknowledging performance," he said, but there was a flicker of amusement in his tone. She turned to him, studying the profile lit by neon and skyline. "Why me?" she asked softly. "You could have chosen anyone. You had your pick of Ivy League prodigies, polished assistants who know every corporate buzzword." He looked at her, eyes unreadable as always. "Because you don't perform," he said simply. "You mean what you say, you listen, you notice things others don't." Maya swallowed. Maybe I'm just nosy. That too. She laughed, but her chest tightened. He was opening up slowly, quietly, but she still hadn't told him the full truth. He didn't know she was a journalist. He didn't know her original reason for getting into this building was a byline, not a bond. And the more time she spent with him, the more that lie began to rot beneath her ribs. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she opened the hidden file she'd started weeks ago, the one labeled D. Blackwood Internal. She stared at it for a long time. Then she clicked Move to Trash. But she didn't delete it. Not yet. Because she wasn't sure if she was falling for Damian Blackwood the man, or the story she thought she was writing. It started with a drawer. Maya wasn't snooping, at least, not intentionally. Damian had asked her to find a report from 2 months ago, and she opened the wrong cabinet in his office. Inside, a stack of old folders yellowing at the edges. Most were nondescript, but one caught her eye, its label handwritten, slightly smudged. Lucian. The name meant nothing to her until she opened it. Newspaper clippings, internal memos, legal correspondence. She skimmed quickly, not absorbing every detail, but the pattern emerged fast. Lucian Blackwood, Damian's half-brother, once co-founder of Blackwood Media's early precursor, now completely erased from the company's official history. The clippings painted a clear story. 10 years ago, Lucian had orchestrated a secret merger with a rival media firm behind Damian's back, one that would have handed over controlling interest to outside investors. Damian found out just days before the deal closed. He'd exposed it, shut it down, and in doing so, nearly collapsed the entire company. Lucian disappeared from the business world soon after. Quiet settlement, no press, no scandal, just gone. Except to Damian, he'd kept everything. Maya carefully placed the file back, heart thudding. She didn't mention it right away. But a week later, she found the moment. They were in the archives room, reviewing some ancient marketing campaigns when the lights flickered overhead. Damian stood still for a moment longer than usual, his hand hovering over a dusty reel. She stepped closer. Lucian, she said softly, he was your brother. He turned to her slowly, no surprise in his face, just silence. You opened the wrong drawer. I wasn't trying to dig. You didn't need to, he said. The past has a way of seeping through cracks. She hesitated. Why didn't you go public if he betrayed you? Because betrayal is only scandalous when someone's watching, he said. No one was, and if they had been, it would have taken both of us down. Maya was quiet. Damian looked away, eyes on something distant. He didn't just try to sell the company, he sold me. The vision, the integrity, all for a quicker payday, and I trusted him more than anyone. There was a weight in those words, something she hadn't heard from him before. Hurt. Not anger, not control, just pain buried deep. I rebuilt everything after that, he continued. From scratch, on my own terms, and I've never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. Maya felt her chest tighten. Suddenly, everything about Damian, his routines, his need for control, his refusal to be vulnerable, clicked into place. You don't just run this company, she said gently. You guard it. He looked at her then, eyes sharp but unshielded. Wouldn't you? She didn't answer because yes, she would. And it scared her how much she understood him now. How close she was to caring too much. And how much it would hurt when he found out who she really was. He was waiting for her in the cafe downstairs. Not Damian, not Zoe. Lucian. She recognized him instantly from the photo she'd seen in Damian's file. The resemblance was unmistakable, same sharp jawline, same cold eyes. But where Damian was intensity contained, Lucian was all charm and polish. A wolf in a silk tie. Miss Evans, he said smoothly, standing as she approached, you're even more intriguing in person. Maya paused, heart thudding. You know who I am." Lucian smiled. "Of course I do. You're the girl who slipped past 4 levels of security and somehow ended up in Damien's inner circle in under a month. Quite a resume." She sat slowly, choosing her words with care. "Is this about Damien?" He tilted his head. "It's about you." He gestured toward the untouched espresso in front of him. "You're ambitious, smart. You see things most people miss. And I think you already know this company has cracks in its foundation." Maya said nothing. Lucian leaned in, dropping the charm just slightly. "I'm not here to threaten you, Maya. I'm here to offer you something. Real opportunity. Not assistant busywork or chasing ethics down a rabbit hole. I'm talking influence. Reach. Your own platform." She stared at him. "In exchange for what?" "A small favor," he said easily. "You've already seen how much Damien hides. I'm asking you to keep your eyes open, that's all. And tell you what I see. If it's worth knowing." Maya felt her stomach twist. He sat back, reading her like a well-worn novel. "Don't look so shocked. Every empire has its shadows. The smart ones don't try to clean them, they learn how to use them." She stood abruptly. "I'm not for sale." Lucian didn't flinch, he only smiled wider. "Everyone's for sale, Maya, it's just a matter of price." She turned and walked away without another word. But the moment she stepped back into the elevator, the walls seemed to close in. Her skin itched, her thoughts raced. He knew too much. He was watching her. And if he'd made this offer, it meant something was coming. When she reached her floor, she glanced over her shoulder before stepping out. She didn't see anyone. But the feeling didn't leave. Lucian hadn't needed her answer. He already knew she'd refuse, this time. It was a warning wrapped as a gift. And Maya Evans had just made herself a target. The email came at 7:03 a.m. Subject line: "Thought you might find this enlightening." No name, just a file attachment. Maya stared at it for a long time before clicking. It was a Word document, her old pitch. The one she'd written weeks ago before any of this started. A raw, unfiltered draft titled, "The Ghost King, Inside Blackwood Media and the Man Who Built It." Her stomach dropped. It wasn't finished. It wasn't even accurate anymore. It was speculative, ambitious, and frankly, brutal. A clinical breakdown of Damien's public persona and the manipulative empire she thought he ran. She'd never meant to send it, she never had, but someone had found it. And now it was sitting, open, on Damien's desk. When she entered his office at 9:00 sharp, he didn't look up, just motioned toward the file with one finger. "Care to explain?" Maya stepped forward slowly, throat dry. "Damien, that's an old draft. I never submitted it. I never intended to publish." "But you wrote it," he said, finally meeting her eyes, cold, remote. "You planned this." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I thought I would before I knew you, before I understood what this place actually is, who you are." He stood, every movement precise. "So you weren't investigating me. You didn't sneak into my office that day with a false identity and a voice recorder in your bag." She flinched. "I didn't even use it." "But you brought it." Silence crashed between them like glass shattering on stone. "I didn't come here to destroy you," she said, voice trembling. "But I stayed because I saw something real, and I care now. Damien, please." "I don't need your care," he said, his tone clipped, surgical. "I needed your honesty. You had 1,000 chances to tell me who you really were. You chose not to." She stepped closer, "Because I didn't want to lose you. You never had me." That one hit harder than she expected, harder than anything. He walked to the door and opened it. "Leave your badge on the desk." Maya didn't move. "I trusted you," he added, almost an afterthought. And somehow that quiet admission felt more painful than if he'd screamed. She left the badge and walked out of the office, out of Blackwood Media, with her heart thudding like war drums in her ears. Only when the elevator doors closed behind her did she let herself crumble. The apartment felt colder than she remembered. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn into Blackwood Tower that morning. The silence around her was deafening. It wasn't just the loss of a job or the humiliation of being dismissed. It was him. Damien's words echoed relentlessly. "You never had me." She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temples as if she could force the memory out, crush it, rewrite it. She'd messed up. No matter how much she wanted to justify it, how much her intentions had shifted, she had lied. She'd let the truth come out too late. Her laptop sat closed on the kitchen table, the red notification light blinking like a silent judgment. She couldn't bring herself to open it. Not yet. She reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, beneath old college name tags and half-finished notes, was a folded piece of newspaper, creased, yellowed, nearly falling apart. The headline still haunted her. Teen hacker leaks private files, family under fire. Her brother Jacob had been 17, smart, naive. He thought he was exposing something unjust, just like she'd always believed journalism was meant to do. But one click had spiraled into chaos. The media twisted it, painted him as a criminal, left out the part where he tried to warn people. 3 weeks after the story broke, he'd been gone. Depression, isolation, no charges filed, just shame thick and inescapable. No outlet ever issued a correction. No journalist ever knocked on their door to ask what really happened. That was the day Maya promised herself she'd become the kind of reporter who looked longer, listened harder, and told the truth better. That promise had brought her to Damien Blackwood. And now, she owed it to both Jacob and Damien to make things right. Not just to win Damien back, not to clear her name, but because truth matters, and she wasn't done telling it. She stood slowly, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop, this time not to write a story, but to gather names, patterns, leaks, anything that might prove who really sent that file to Damien. Because it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a setup. And Maya Evans was done being quiet. The office was dark, long after everyone had left. Damien sat in his chair, the skyline of Manhattan casting reflections across the floor-to-ceiling windows. The lights from the buildings danced like static, alive, chaotic. The world kept moving, unbothered, unaware. He hadn't turned on the lights, didn't need to. Her badge still sat on the desk where she left it. Face down, final. He picked it up slowly, as if it might burn him. His thumb brushed over her photo, the plastic casing cool beneath his skin. "You never had me." He had meant to hurt her. The words had come out too fast, too sharp, but they were easier than admitting the truth. The truth was, she'd had him. More than she knew. More than he had realized, until it was too late. He set the badge down, stood up, and walked to the far edge of the office. The view was the same as always, high above it all, perfectly isolated. Damien prided himself on being unshakable. He didn't let people in, not since her. Sabrina. That betrayal had come quietly too, sweet smiles, late-night confessions, a relationship that blurred the line between intimacy and access. And when the exposé came out, signed with her name, he'd sworn never again. Maya had been different. She hadn't wanted to expose him, not at first, but she had lied. She had come into his space with an agenda, and worse, she'd made him believe. Believe that he could trust again. Believe that someone saw him, not just the empire. He leaned forward, bracing his palms against the cold glass. His reflection stared back, pale and tired. And then, without warning, it cracked. Not the glass. Him. His breath hitched just once, barely a sound, but it was enough. He pressed a fist to his mouth, shoulders trembling, not from rage, but from something he couldn't hold back anymore. Tears came, slow, silent. No heaving, no sobs, just water he hadn't permitted for years, sliding down a face that the world believed was carved from stone. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Because this wasn't just about Maya. It wasn't even just about betrayal. It was about the terrifying realization that he had begun to hope. And that hope, like everything else in his world, had a price. The bell above the bookstore door gave a soft chime as Maya stepped inside. She hadn't seen Rena in almost a year. They used to be inseparable in journalism school, Maya with her relentless idealism, Rena with her acid wit and a love for digging where no one else dared. But after graduation, Rena had taken a darker path, diving headfirst vowing gan di stroke I letter 1 EC1 U tra and G letter 1 E7M, Noi tin T letter 1 E9 C Kong CH letter 1 EC9 La Thong Tin Macon La Hang Hoa. Maya had chosen caution. Rena had chosen truth, no matter how dirty it got. Rena looked up from behind the counter, a pen tucked into her messy bun. Well, well, she said, raising an eyebrow. The prodigal reporter returns. Let me guess, you need help burning down a media empire. Maya managed a small smile, something like that. They sat in the back, surrounded by old paperbacks and the scent of ink. Maya laid everything out. The file leak, the old draft that someone had stolen, Zoe's coded remarks, Lucian's offer. She didn't hold anything back, not this time. Rena listened, her face unreadable, only nodding once in a while. When Maya finished, there was a long pause. You've got the bones of something big, Rena said finally. But if you're right about Zoe and Lucian, you're not just stepping on toes, you're stepping on landmines. I know, Maya said. That's why I came to you. Rena leaned back, considering. All right, first thing we do is trace the leak. That file of yours. It didn't just fly into Damien's inbox. Someone planted it. And I bet you anything it passed through a buried server off the official network. Maya nodded. Zoe has access, so does Lucian. And so do a dozen others, Rena said. But they're not the type to leave fingerprints. We'll have to dig, quietly. They started that night. Burner laptops, proxy servers, a list of names. Rena pulled up old connections, reporters who owed her favors, ex-hackers turned whistleblowers, even a former Blackwood IT tech with a grudge. As the hours passed, Maya felt the fire in her reignite. Not for revenge. For the truth. For Jacob. And maybe for Damien. Because if someone wanted her out that badly, it meant she had been close. Too close. And this time, she wasn't walking away. The envelope arrived in a plain manila sleeve, hand-delivered to Damien's office at exactly 7:45 a.m. No return address, no note. Inside was a flash drive labeled in blue ink, watch first, then decide. Damien hesitated only a moment before plugging it in. The screen lit up. Folder 1, Server Logs Internal Access Points. Folder 2, Zoe Unencrypted Messages. Folder 3, Lucian Internal Transfers Hidden Routing. And at the very bottom, a short video file named for you. He clicked it. Maya's face appeared, tired but steady. I know you don't want to see me, she said. No makeup, no pretense. And I know I've lost the right to explain anything in person, but this isn't about me, or us. She paused. This is about your company, your legacy, and the people trying to gut it from the inside. Her voice didn't tremble, not once. I didn't come back for forgiveness, she continued. I came back because someone has to tell the truth, and this time I'm not writing it, I'm giving it to you. The screen went black. Damien sat motionless. For a moment, all he could hear was the low hum of the AC vent above, then the sound of his own heartbeat, steady but heavy. She could have sold it, leaked it, ruined him. Instead, she'd protected him. Why? It didn't make sense. Not for someone who claimed to be a reporter, not for someone who'd been lied to, pushed away, humiliated. Unless, unless she had meant it. All of it. The trust, the connection, the look in her eyes when she said he didn't have to be invincible. He leaned back in his chair, pressing a hand to his face. Zoe, Lucian, the leak, the manipulation. It was all there, laid out like a loaded weapon. But the most disarming thing was her silence. She hadn't asked for anything in return. And that scared him more than if she had. Because maybe, just maybe, she still believed in him. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had never been this quiet. Damien stood at the head of the long, gleaming table, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, hands braced on the edge like a man preparing for war. Around him, department heads, legal advisors, and board members shifted in their seats, sensing something was coming, but unsure who it would strike first. Zoe sat 3 seats down, unbothered, unshaken. Her red nails tapped rhythmically against her leather notebook. Lucian reclined beside her, calm, composed, like he'd already won. "I've called this meeting," Damien began, "because there's been a breach in our internal systems, a deliberate act of sabotage. Someone tried to frame an employee and manipulate executive trust." No one breathed. He reached into a folder and slid a small remote across the table. The screen behind him lit up. Email logs, access timestamps, transferred funds routed through shell accounts, unedited Slack messages. Then, Zoe's voice, clear in an audio clip. "She's not a threat yet, but we're watching her." Zoe smiled. "Surveillance, Damien, really? Have we come to this?" "No," Damien said evenly. "You did." Maya stepped forward from the corner of the room, unnoticed until now. She placed a printed report down on the table in front of Lucian. "The trail leads back to both of you. All of it, leaked files, redirected press releases, internal manipulation." Lucian didn't flinch. "You have no authority here, Ms. Evans." "I don't need it," she replied. "The truth doesn't require a title." Zoe chuckled, crossing her legs. "This is cute, really. But you can't win this way, Damien. You can't fight the machine you helped build. You don't get to play hero now." She leaned forward, voice soft, dangerous. "You can't win the media war with ethics." Damien looked at her for a long time, then simply said, "No, but I can start over with the truth." Silence. A few board members exchanged looks. One cleared his throat and said carefully, "Are you suggesting we restructure?" "I'm suggesting we cleanse," Damien replied. "Effective immediately, Zoe Lively and Lucian Blackwood are relieved of all decision-making capacity. Full investigation follows." Zoe stood still, smiling, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Damien said, "but at least I'll regret it honestly." As security escorted them out, Lucian paused in the doorway. "You think this changes anything?" Damien didn't answer him. He turned to Maya instead. "You stayed," he said quietly, "even when you had every reason not to." Maya met his eyes steady. "I didn't stay for you, I stayed for the story." "A beat. Turns out," she added softly, "you were it." The press release dropped on a Thursday morning. Blackwood Media, RESTRUCTORES leadership. CEO Damien Blackwood steps down, forms independent journalism initiative. The industry reeled. Speculation surged. Was he pushed out? Was there a scandal, a cover-up? But inside the glass walls of Blackwood Tower, things were strangely quiet, peaceful even. Damien stood at the top of the grand atrium staircase, speaking to the staff, not as a CEO, not as a king stepping down from his throne, but as a man shedding his armor. "I built this company because I believed in truth," he said, voice calm, clear. "And somewhere along the way, I let fear and control disguise themselves as integrity. That ends today." There was no bitterness in his words, no self-pity. just clarity. He formally announced the formation of a new executive board, diverse, transparent, accountable. No single name above the others. No Lucian. No Zoe. Not even Damian Blackwood himself. And then he shared something unexpected. "I'm starting something new," he said. "A foundation, not for profit, not for headlines, for hope." He looked out over the crowd, some confused, some wide-eyed. "It's called the Evans Foundation," he added almost gently. "For independent journalists, the ones with no funding, no connections, just courage and a need to tell the truth." Maya wasn't in the building when he said it, but the video spread fast. She watched it that night on her couch, alone, laptop balanced on her knees, eyes stinging as his words played again. Evans, not Blackwood. He hadn't just believed her. He'd honored her. And in doing so, he'd rewritten the ending to a story that once had been all about control. Now it was about letting go. Maya didn't return to any newsroom. Offers came predictably. After the Blackwood scandal broke, her inbox flooded with proposals, interviews, book deals, even a talk show guest spot. She declined them all. Instead, she launched a blog. No press team, no brand strategy, just a domain name she bought with the last of her freelance money, truthournot.com. It was bare bones, honest, raw. Each post tackled one question, one headline, one viral claim, one whispered theory, and broke it down with calm, patient reporting. No ads, no bias, just facts and the quiet voice of someone who'd been burned but still believed in the flame. Her first article was titled, "What Makes Power Dangerous?" She didn't name names. She didn't have to. Meanwhile, Damien vanished. He didn't make a farewell speech. No press conference, no dramatic airport shot. One day he was on every business headline, the next gone. Rumors swirled. Some said he was in Switzerland, starting a think tank. Others whispered he'd bought a vineyard in France. The wildest theory, that Damian Blackwood had enrolled in a culinary retreat in the south of Italy to learn how to bake real bread. Maya snorted when she read that one. But part of her kind of liked it. The image of him, sleeves rolled up, flour on his nose, silent in a warm kitchen somewhere, far from blinking cursors and PR wars. It suited him strangely. And he hadn't contacted her. Not once. No text, no email, no dramatic midnight knock on the door. He'd let her go. And maybe that was the kindest thing he could have done. Because they had both needed to break. To burn down what wasn't real. So something truer could grow. Even if they never found each other again. Especially if they did. The cover was simple. A beam of light cutting through a fogged glass window. The title in small, deliberate font. Between Truth and Light. By Maya Evans. No flashy endorsements. No from the whistleblower behind the Blackwood leak. Just her name, her words, her story. The book wasn't a memoir exactly. It wasn't a tell-all either. Maya had written it like a long-form letter to anyone who'd ever believed truth was simple, who'd ever thought there were only good people and bad systems, or vice versa. She wrote about the newsroom that made her feel invisible. The idol she tried to expose and ended up understanding. The questions she'd never got to ask on record, because by the time she found the answers, they didn't belong to the world. They belonged to her. She never mentioned Damien by name. He was a silhouette in the narrative, the man behind the curtain, described in brushstrokes and empty spaces, enough to feel real, never enough to trace. And that somehow felt truer than numbing him ever could. Her editor called the manuscript unexpectedly intimate. Reviewers called it piercing and quietly revolutionary. Bookstores moved it from the media section to memoir, then finally settled on philosophy/modern ethics. Maya didn't care where they shelved it. She only cared that people read it. And they did. Journalism students underlined whole pages. Former reporters wrote her letters. A woman in Iowa messaged her to say, "For the first time, I stopped scrolling and started questioning." It wasn't fame. It was something gentler. Something better. It was impact. The bookstore was packed but not loud. People spoke in hushed tones, flipping through pages, waiting in line, smiling nervously when it was their turn at the table. Maya sat behind a stack of her books, black pen in hand, cheeks aching from the soft smile she'd been holding for nearly an hour. She had signed copies for students, professors, bloggers, a retired news anchor who whispered, "We needed this book." And still, every time she wrote her name, she felt a strange weight lift from her chest. It was healing, one signature at a time. Then, as the line began to dwindle, someone stepped forward without a word. A man in a dark coat, scarf pulled low, a book already open to the title page. No cameras turned, no one gasped, just the quiet shuffle of feet and a moment of stillness. Maya looked up. "Damien." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. Neither did he. He placed the book gently in front of her. A pen slid across the table, hers. She looked at it, then at him. "Should I sign it to someone in particular?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a softness to his eyes she hadn't seen since the rooftop, maybe not even then. He turned the book around, took the pen himself, and wrote something beneath her printed name. Then he closed the cover, placed the pen back, and stepped away, without another word. By the time she opened the book again, he was already halfway to the door. Her hands trembled as she read the line he'd written beneath her signature. "Keep writing, don't stop. Because I've chosen to believe you again." Her fingers traced the ink like it might fade if she blinked too long. No dramatic reunion, no promises, no apologies. Just the truth handed back to her. In his handwriting. And somehow, that was more than enough. The signing was over. The last reader had left with their book hugged to their chest, the last paper cup of lukewarm cider tossed into the bin. Inside the little bookstore, silence returned like an old friend, gentle, familiar. Maya gathered her things slowly, hands still trembling from the weight of his handwriting. She didn't expect him to be waiting. But as she stepped outside into the crisp late afternoon air, there he was. Damien stood beside the lamppost, coat collar turned up, a dusting of snow starting to cling to his shoulders. No phone, no words, just him. Their eyes met. No music swelled. No one gasped or turned to stare. The world kept spinning as if it didn't know two people who once lost everything had just found enough. Maya walked toward him. He didn't move. They stood there for a moment, in the soft hush of New York winter, as snowflakes drifted between them like fragile truths. Then, without a word, he fell into step beside her. No explanations, no questions, no need. They walked down the block, shoulder to shoulder, their steps unhurried. Two people who had learned the difference between silence and distance, between closeness and possession. He looked at her once. She looked back. And smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need a beginning or an ending. Just a quiet, steady now. And somewhere between the snow, the city, and their shadows stretching long behind them. It felt like home.